Raise your hand if you've ever experienced imposter syndrome as a nurse, especially an ICU nurse or somebody who wants to be a CRNA, because I know I have. Comment down below. I grew up in a rural town in Western North Carolina, and when I experienced really culture shock for my first time when I started in the ICU. So when I started as a new grad ICU nurse, I started at Johns Hopkins in the CV SICU, and I was in DC area for my partner, and he was doing a PhD in chemistry at George Washington in Washington, D.C. He grew up in the South in Jackson, Mississippi, and I grew up also in the South in Western North Carolina. And living and working in DC, and then me getting my first job at Hopkins really showed me just how big of a class barrier exists inside of the United States. For those of you who haven't already read or listened to it, I highly recommend reading Angela Davis' Women, Race, and Class. I also highly recommend A Collective Bargain for those of you who have not already read Jane McAlevey. But imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome is largely something that affects people who hold marginalized identities. I am a straight passing white woman. And so I hold a lot of privileges in the power structures of the United States. And even so, the class barrier in Washington, D.C. especially was a lot of culture shock. And I very much felt that I did not belong at Johns Hopkins, and I did not belong in these like elite circles in Washington, D.C. There's some interesting research on people who experience imposter phenomenon and marginalized identities. This is one of those studies, and I'll link it below. And I really can only speak to my experience, which is limited because it's just speaking from one perspective. But I highly recommend the books Women, Race, and Class, A Collective Bargain, and also The Courage to be Disliked. I wish that I had known in my 20s to get out of my own way more in terms of being more confident in my own skin. And I wish that I was able to show up in those spaces knowing that just by opening up the door for myself and then being in that room, that I was breaking class stereotypes. And then for people who have more marginalized identities than me, I'm a lesbian, but I'm a white woman, that many other people have more marginalized identities. Being in rooms and opening doors for yourself in terms of education and opportunity, you deserve every single opportunity that you are able to get. I definitely experienced imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome. And now I'm 30, so it's almost 10 years later. And I no longer feel that way as much because I think education is such a tool to open many doors. And comment your favorite book recommendations of your 20s that taught you the most in your 20s as a whole.